They called him a homeless addict, but that day, he became the only reason my son was still alive. The sun was bright that afternoon, the kind of warm that makes the streets shimmer and time slow down. It was a normal Tuesday, grocery list in my hand, Bluetooth in my ear, my thoughts already halfway to the weekend. My son, Jake, walked beside me, humming some song he'd learned at school, holding a blue balloon that kept brushing my shoulder with every step. We were crossing Maple Street, that wide intersection near the park, the one that always feels just a little too busy. When it happened, I turned away for 1 second. Just one. I was checking my phone, responding to a client. That's all it took. By the time I looked up, Jake was gone. For a second, my heart didn't even react. I just stood there, scanning the crowd, half expecting him to pop out from behind a parked car, laughing. But then I heard it. Tires screeching, a horn blaring, the collective gasp of strangers. And then, the sound I'll never forget. The sound of impact. I dropped the groceries and ran. The world narrowed into a tunnel, faces blurred, voices faded. And all I saw was my son, lying in the middle of the street, crying, terrified, but alive. And over him stood a man, thin, unshaven, clothes torn and filthy, eyes wide with panic. He was holding Jake's backpack like a shield. His chest rose and fell fast, his voice shaking as he said, "He ran out. I pulled him back. The car almost hit him." There was chaos around us, people yelling, horns blaring, phones raised, everyone recording instead of helping. I could barely breathe. I knelt beside Jake, checking him, touching his face, his hands. No blood, just scratches. He was okay. That's when I looked at the man again. He was maybe in his 40s, maybe older, hard to tell under the dirt and exhaustion. His hands were trembling. He looked at me like he was waiting for permission to disappear. Then someone in the crowd shouted, "Isn't that the homeless guy who sleeps near the diner?" Another voice, sharper this time, said, "What's he doing with that kid?" The murmurs spread fast, like poison. The man stepped back, panic in his eyes. "I didn't hurt him," he said quickly. "I swear, he ran out and—" But no one wanted to listen. A woman grabbed my arm. "Ma'am, is he with you? Do you know him?" I opened my mouth, and for the briefest moment, I hesitated. I don't know why. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was shock. But that 1 second of silence changed everything. Police sirens cut through the noise. The car that almost hit Jake had already driven off. 2 officers rushed in, pushing through the crowd. They went straight for the man. "Sir, step back," one of them barked. "Hands where I can see them." He froze. "I didn't do anything. Hands up!" Before I could react, they were already pulling his arms behind him, cuffing. Him right there on the street. People clapped. Someone said, "Good, lock him up before he hurts someone." And in that chaos, surrounded by noise, flashing lights, and judgment, the man who had just saved my son's life was treated like a criminal. I tried to speak. "Wait, no, he saved—" But the officer cut me off. "Ma'am, please stand back. We'll handle this." Jake clung to me, crying. "Mom, why are they taking him? He saved me." I couldn't answer. My throat felt like it was closing. They searched him, found nothing but a folded piece of cardboard that said, "We'll work for food," and a small crumpled photograph. The officer looked at it for a moment, then pocketed it. The man turned toward me as they led him away. His eyes met mine, not angry, not even pleading, just tired. He said one thing before disappearing behind the patrol car door. "I didn't want anything. I just didn't want him to die." And then he was gone. The sirens faded. The crowd thinned. The cameras turned off. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, holding Jake, my heartbeat pounding against his. He whispered, "Mom, he's a hero. Why are they taking heroes to jail?" I wanted to tell him the truth. But the truth was, I didn't know what that word even meant anymore. I didn't know it then. But that moment, that silence, would cost that man everything. When truth meets prejudice, innocence becomes invisible. That night, sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the stranger's face, the fear in his eyes when the handcuffs clicked shut, the sound of my own silence echoing louder than the police sirens ever did. I sat on the edge of my bed, watching the city lights flicker through the blinds while my husband snored softly beside me. I wanted to wake him up, to tell him everything that had happened, but I didn't know how to explain the one thing that haunted me, that I'd watched a man be punished for saving my child, and I did nothing. By morning, the news had already found us. The story was everywhere. Homeless man detained after near accident involving child. That was the headline. Cold, convenient, easy to misunderstand. They made it sound like he was the cause, not the savior. The article called him transient, because that's what people call you when they don't know your story. My husband read it at the breakfast table, frowning. "Isn't this what happened yesterday?" he asked. I nodded. "That's Jake," I said quietly. He looked at me sharply. "What? You were there?" I told him everything. How the man had pulled Jake back from the street, how the crowd turned, how the police took him away. He sighed, shaking his head. "You should have just walked away, Sarah. People like that, they're unpredictable. You can't trust them." "People like that?" I repeated. He shrugged. "Homeless guys. You never know if they're high or dangerous. You did what anyone would have done." But that's the thing. I hadn't done anything. And that truth sat in my chest like a stone. That afternoon, I went to the police station. The air smelled like coffee and disinfectant. Behind the counter sat a bored-looking officer scrolling through his phone. "I'm here about the man you arrested yesterday," I said. "He didn't do anything wrong." He didn't even look up. "Name?" I don't know. But he was there when my son—" "Ma'am," he interrupted, "if you don't have a name or case number, I can't help you." "He saved my son," I said firmly. "You have to check." He sighed, typing something lazily on his keyboard. "Homeless male? Mid-40s? Picked up yesterday?" "Yeah, he's being held downtown." "For what?" I asked. He shrugged. "Resisting arrest, trespassing, standard stuff." Standard stuff, as if saving a child and being handcuffed for it was just another Tuesday. "Can I see him?" "Not unless you're family." I wanted to scream, to shake the desk until someone actually looked at me, but instead I just nodded and left, because sometimes silence feels safer than shouting. That evening, Jake came into the living room holding a drawing he'd made. A stick figure of a man with messy hair standing next to a car. He'd written, "My hero," in shaky letters above it. "Do you think he's okay, Mom?" he asked. My throat tightened. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I hope so." He looked up at me with that same innocent certainty only kids have. "We should help him. Heroes shouldn't be sad." I smiled weakly and kissed his forehead, but his words hit harder than he could ever understand. Because I realized something that moment. Jake was right. Heroes shouldn't be sad. And yet, the man who had saved him was sitting in a cell, alone, forgotten, while I pretended everything was fine. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed, the newspaper spread open in front of me. I stared at that word again, transient. People used words like that so they didn't have to feel guilt. Transient meant temporary, replaceable, invisible. But he wasn't. He had a voice, a story, a reason. And I was the only one who had seen it. The clock ticked loudly in the stillness. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I returned to that same corner, Maple Street, the place where everything had changed. The groceries were gone, the traffic loud as ever, the world moving on as if nothing had happened. But I stood there, clutching a small note I had written in my hand. "To the man who saved my son. I'm sorry. Please, let me make this right." I didn't know if he'd ever see it, but I left it on the bench anyway, right where he'd stood that day. For a moment, I just stared at it. A note for a man I didn't even know, but couldn't stop thinking about. A man whose only crime was being invisible in a world that sees only what it wants to. I turned to leave, But something caught my eye. A small piece of paper under the bench. Old, wrinkled, with faint writing on the back. I picked it up carefully. It was a photograph. A little girl with dark hair and a missing front tooth, grinning proudly at the camera. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, "My Grace, 2015. I stared at it for a long moment. That was when I realized he wasn't just some man. He was someone's father. The next morning I went looking for him, but he was gone. He had nothing, except a single photo that told a lifetime of loss. I couldn't stop staring at that photograph. The girl's smile was radiant, the kind of smile that freezes time, that belongs to someone who thought the world was still kind. Her hair was tied in 2 messy pigtails, her eyes full of mischief and light. On the back, the handwriting said, "My Grace, 2015. That name stayed with me. Grace. It didn't just sound like a name, it sounded like a message. For the next few days I couldn't focus on anything. Not work, not home, not even Jake's constant chatter about school. Every time I passed Maple Street, my chest tightened. The city had swallowed him. The man who'd saved my son, who'd vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a picture and silence. I needed to find him. The diner owner on the corner knew more than she let on. She was in her late 60s, kind eyes, and a voice roughened by years of coffee and cigarettes. When I showed her the photo, she sighed. "You're talking about Ethan." "Ethan?" I repeated. "Yeah," she said, wiping down the counter. "Ethan Cole. Used to come by here every morning for coffee. Paid when he could, worked odd jobs when people gave him a chance." I hesitated. "What happened to him?" Her hand froze mid-wipe. "What always happens," she said bitterly. "Life." I pressed gently. And that's when the story spilled out. Quiet, unpolished, but heavy. Ethan had once been a construction foreman. Married, 1 daughter. Grace. They lived in a small house near the river. 5 years ago, a fire broke out while he was on a night shift. The firefighters said it started from faulty wiring. His wife and daughter didn't make it out. He'd come home to ashes. They said he blamed himself, quit his job, sold what little he had left, and just disappeared until he showed up here, months later. Homeless. Alone. The woman's voice softened. He never begged, never caused trouble, always carried that photo around, said it kept him alive. I looked down at the photo again, the edges still warm from my hand. "Do you know where he might be now?" I asked. She shrugged. "There's a church shelter 2 blocks down. He sleeps there when it's cold." The church wasn't hard to find. White stone walls, old wooden doors, a cross that leaned just slightly under the weight of time. Inside, the air smelled of wax and rain. Rows of empty pews stretched out, and in the back, a few men huddled near the heater, wrapped in old coats. "Excuse me," I whispered to a volunteer. "I'm looking for someone. Ethan Cole." The man nodded. "He's here sometimes. Quiet guy. Haven't seen him since the police took him last week." My heart sank. "Do you know if he's okay?" He shook his head slowly. "All I know is the world's harder on good men than it should be." I stepped outside, the air sharp and cold against my skin. The city was buzzing with its usual rhythm. Cars rushing, people moving, lives colliding and separating like raindrops on glass. And in the middle of all that noise, I stood still, clutching that photo like it was proof that goodness still existed, even if it was buried under dirt and pain. I thought about Ethan's face, the way he'd looked at Jake, not with pity or curiosity, but with something deeper. Recognition. Because maybe he wasn't just saving my son that day. Maybe, in some way, he was saving his own child all over again. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the lights dim, the world outside fading into silence. The photo lay in front of me, and next to it, a note I'd written, folded neatly. "To Ethan, if you ever see this, please know that someone believes you. You didn't just save my son. You saved me too." I didn't know if he'd ever read it, but it felt like something I had to do. Before going to bed, I placed the photo on the mantel beside Jake's school picture. 2 children, 2 worlds, both reminders of how fragile everything truly is. The next morning, I drove to the police station again. This time I wasn't leaving without answers. A different officer was on duty, younger, more alert. I asked about Ethan Cole. He frowned, tapping on his keyboard. Cole. Yeah, he was processed last week. Where is he now? I asked quickly. Released yesterday, the officer replied. Charges dropped. Guess they didn't have anything solid. My heart skipped. Released? Where did he go? He shrugged. No address listed. Homeless, remember? That word again, homeless. A word that erases everything else you've ever been. I left the station, my mind racing. He was out there, somewhere, alone. I didn't know it yet, but the man I was searching for had already saved me in more ways than one. That night, Jake came into my room, half asleep, holding his drawing again. Mom, he mumbled, I dreamed about the man who saved me. He said he misses his little girl. I froze. What? Jake yawned. He said her name was Grace. Like a prayer. He crawled into bed and fell asleep within seconds, his small hand resting over mine. I stared at him, my heart pounding. Grace. The same name written on the back of that photo. Maybe it was coincidence? Maybe it wasn't. But, deep down, something told me this story was far from over. I didn't know it yet, but the man I was searching for had already saved me in more ways than one. Some people carry their past like a burden. Others carry it like a promise. The next morning began gray, the kind of dull light that makes everything look tired. I couldn't shake the thought of Ethan. He was free, somewhere out there, carrying nothing but a photograph and the weight of a world that never saw him. I packed a thermos of coffee, a sandwich, and Jake's drawing, the one with "My Hero" scrawled across the top, and drove toward the east end of the city, where the shelters lined the streets like forgotten doorways. The first one smelled of bleach and exhaustion. Dozens of men sat on metal chairs, their eyes distant, their hands clutching paper cups of watery soup. I asked about Ethan at the reception desk, but the woman just shook her head. You're the 3rd person to ask for him this week, she said. He comes and goes, keeps to himself. If you find him, tell him Pastor Dan's looking for him too. That name, Pastor Dan, became my next lead. The church was only a few blocks away, small but warm inside. Candles flickered beneath stained glass windows, painting the floor with broken colors. Behind the altar stood a tall man in a wool sweater, his sleeves rolled up, hands stained with candle wax. Are you Pastor Dan? I asked. He smiled. That's me. You looking for Ethan? Yes, I said quickly. He saved my son's life last week, but he was arrested, and now I can't find him. The pastor's face softened. Ethan's a good man, he said quietly. He's been through hell, but his heart's still kind. He stays in the basement when it rains. Haven't seen him for 2 days, though. Said he needed to make things right. Make things right? I repeated. The pastor nodded. He didn't say what, just left this behind. He handed me a folded piece of paper, the edges damp and wrinkled. Inside was a short note written in shaky handwriting. If I can do one good thing before I go, maybe Grace will forgive me. The words hit like a blow to the chest. Do you know what he meant? I asked. The pastor sighed. He blames himself for the fire. The investigators cleared him years ago, but guilt doesn't need proof. He said the day he pulled your boy from the street was the first time he'd felt peace in years. Maybe he thinks that was enough. Maybe he's trying to disappear again. My heart tightened. No, not after everything. He deserves more than that. The pastor looked at me with quiet conviction. Then find him before he gives up on himself completely. I left the church and walked down the wet sidewalk, the note trembling in my hand. The city felt heavier that day, its noise too loud, its people too fast. I checked every bench near Maple Street, every corner where the forgotten gathered, but he was nowhere. By dusk, I was ready to give up. I sat on the same bench where I'd left my first note, staring at the traffic lights flicking between red and green. The world kept moving, unaware that somewhere out there was a man whose entire existence had been reduced to whispers. And then, a voice behind me. "You dropped this last week." I turned. Ethan stood there, thinner than I remembered, rainwater dripping from his hair, his coat torn at the sleeve. He held the note I'd left days earlier, creased but intact. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of passing cars filled the silence. "I've been looking for you," I said finally. He smiled faintly. "Not many people say that to me." I handed him the thermos and the sandwich. "I owe you more than food, but this is a start." He accepted it carefully, as though afraid it might break. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "Your boy's okay. That's all I needed." I studied his face, the deep lines of exhaustion, the way his eyes darted between gratitude and shame. "I know about your daughter," I said softly. "Grace." His hands froze. The thermos trembled. "Where did you—" "I found the photo," I interrupted gently. "By the bench. She looks like you." He looked down, and for the first time, I saw tears gather in his eyes. "She was 8, he whispered. "She wanted to bake a cake for her mom's birthday. The wiring in the kitchen shorted. I was supposed to fix it that week, but I kept putting it off. I was working overtime. Said I'd do it later." He swallowed hard. Later never came. The words came out in fragments, each one cracking open a deeper wound. "I tried to go on," he continued, "but every day I'd see another little girl holding her father's hand, and I'd remember. I kept her picture because it was the only proof I had that something good once loved me." I sat beside him. "You didn't deserve what happened, Ethan." He laughed bitterly. "Maybe not. But I didn't deserve forgiveness either." I reached into my bag and pulled out Jake's drawing, the one with the words, "My hero." I handed it to him. He looked at it, his breath catching. "He drew this?" "Yes," I said. "He wanted you to have it." Ethan traced the shaky lines with his thumb. "Nobody's called me a hero before," he murmured. "Feels strange." "Maybe because you've forgotten what that means," I said quietly. "You didn't just save my son, you reminded me what courage looks like." For a long time, we just sat there, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, two broken lives sharing silence. Then he said something that I'll never forget. "I used to think my life ended the night of the fire, but maybe Grace didn't die for nothing. Maybe she sent me to that street, to your son." The rain started again, soft and steady, washing the dust from the world around us. I looked at him and said, "Then let's not waste what she gave us. Come back to the church. Let's get you help." He shook his head weakly. "I don't belong there." "You belong somewhere," I said firmly. "And this time I'm not walking away." That night, I drove him back to the shelter. The volunteers looked up in surprise as we walked in together. Pastor Dan smiled, relief softening his tired eyes. Ethan hesitated at the doorway, then whispered, "You really think I can start again?" I squeezed his shoulder. "You already did. The moment you saved my son." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Then maybe Grace forgave me after all." I didn't know it yet, but helping Ethan would uncover a secret even he didn't remember, one that would change both our lives forever. Sometimes the people who save us have been part of our story all along. We just didn't see it yet. It had been 3 days since Ethan moved back into the church shelter. Every morning, I stopped by before work to bring him coffee and fresh clothes. At first he resisted. He said he wasn't used to being treated like a person anymore. But gradually, the distance in his eyes began to fade. Jake insisted on coming with me one morning. The two of them had met only once since the accident, just a quick handshake and a shy smile. But this time, when Jake saw him, he ran straight into Ethan's arms. "You're my hero," he said simply. Ethan froze for a second, then hugged him back, tears gathering in his eyes. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he whispered. Jake smiled up at him. "Your daughter?" Ethan nodded silently, his lips trembling. Pastor Dan joined us at the small table near the church kitchen. The room smelled of coffee and toasted bread. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, scattering colors across Ethan's worn face. "I spoke to a few people downtown," the pastor said. "There's a rehab program that partners with small construction firms. They take in skilled workers, even if they've been out of work for years." Ethan frowned. "You think they'd take someone like me?" "You built houses," I said softly. "You can rebuild your own life, too." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that's afraid to believe in itself. "It's been a long time since anyone said that to me." Jake tugged on his sleeve. "Mom says if you start again, it's like planting a flower after a storm." Ethan chuckled. "Smart kid." I smiled at them both, feeling something inside me shift, like the world was slowly correcting a mistake. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Ethan's story, about Grace, about the fire, about how guilt had become the roof he lived under. I pulled out the old photo again, the one I'd found under the bench. The back still read, "My Grace, 2015. But as I turned it over in my hands, noticed something I hadn't before, faintly visible in the bottom corner, a hospital logo stamped into the edge. Riverstone Memorial Hospital. The name hit me like a whisper from the past. That was the same hospital where Jake had been born. My chest tightened. Could it be coincidence? Maybe. But something told me there was more to this story. The next day, I visited the hospital records office. The clerk, an older woman with silver glasses, looked at me suspiciously when I asked about a fire victim file from 2015. "Are you family?" she asked. I knew them," I said carefully. "Ethan and his daughter, Grace." She sighed, flipping through her computer. "Those files are archived, but there's one note. Says the girl was admitted briefly before being transferred." "Transferred where?" She squinted at the screen. "St. Margaret's Children's Center, out of town. Looks like she survived the fire long enough to be moved, but there's no follow-up listed here." My breath caught. "She survived?" "For a while, yes, but after that, I don't know." I left the hospital trembling. All this time, Ethan had believed Grace died that night. What if she hadn't? What if somewhere, somehow, the truth had been buried under grief and paperwork? I needed answers, but I wasn't sure I was ready for what I might find. That evening, I went to see Ethan at the shelter. He was sitting by the window, carving something small out of wood, an old habit from his construction days. When he saw me, he smiled. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said lightly. I hesitated. "Ethan, I need to ask you something about the fire." His expression darkened. "I don't like to talk about it." "I know," I said gently. "But it's important. Do you remember which hospital Grace was taken to?" He looked at me strangely. "They told me she didn't make it out. I never saw her body. The police said the flames were too strong." I took a deep breath. "Ethan, there's a chance she was alive. For a while." He froze. The wooden carving slipped from his hand and hit the floor. "What did you just say?" "I checked the records. She was transferred to another hospital before they finalized the report." For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes filled with disbelief, then hope, then fear, the kind that comes from daring to believe after too many years of pain. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "I saw it myself." He stood abruptly, pacing the small room, hands shaking. "All these years, I thought—" His voice broke. "I buried an empty grave." Tears slid down his face as he pressed a trembling hand to his eyes. If she lived, even for one more day, I should have been there. She must have been so scared. I reached out, gripping his arm. "Then let's find out what really happened." Pastor Dan stepped into the room then, his eyes full of quiet concern. "What's going on?" Ethan turned to him, his voice unsteady. "Grace might have survived the fire. She was moved to another hospital." The pastor's expression flickered between shock and understanding. "Then we find her file," he said, "and if she's still out there—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. For the first time since I'd met him, Ethan's eyes burned with something other than regret. Hope. That night, as I drove home, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. The rain fell harder, blurring the traffic lights into streaks of red and gold. Jake was asleep in the back seat, his small face peaceful in the glow of the dashboard. And I couldn't stop thinking, what if this wasn't just about finding Grace? What if fate had brought Ethan into our lives for a reason far bigger than we could see? I thought I was helping Ethan find his daughter. I didn't realize I was about to uncover a secret that connected our families forever. Some truths hide in plain sight, waiting for the moment we're brave enough to see them. Morning came heavy with fog. The church bells echoed through the damp streets as I parked outside St. Margaret's Children's Center. It wasn't really a hospital anymore, just an old, half-abandoned pediatric clinic turned into a charity wing. The windows were clouded with dust, and the sign out front leaned sideways, its paint peeling. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. A receptionist sat behind a cracked glass window, flipping through files that looked as old as the building itself. "Hi," I said softly, placing Grace's photo on the counter. "I'm trying to find out if this child was treated here in 2015. Her name was Grace Cole." The woman peered at the photo, her brow furrowing. "Cole, that does sound familiar." She typed something into an aging computer. "Yes, we had a Grace Cole admitted on July 9, 2015. Smoke inhalation, minor burns. She was transferred here from Riverstone Memorial." My heart pounded. "What happened to her?" The receptionist hesitated. "There's a confidentiality note attached. The file was sealed by social services." "Sealed? Why?" "Standard procedure when a minor becomes a ward of the state," she said. "It says she was released into protective custody 2 weeks later." I froze. "Protective custody? To where?" She shook her head. "No address listed. But the caseworker's name is here. Sarah Langston." The world tilted. That was my name. She must have seen the color drain from my face because she frowned. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I stepped back slowly, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Could I see the file?" "I'm sorry," she said firmly. "It's sealed." I turned and walked out before she could ask more questions. My legs felt weak. The fog outside had thickened, wrapping the world in silence. Sarah Langston. My name. On Grace Cole's file. It didn't make sense. That night, I couldn't eat. Couldn't think. The name kept circling in my head like a clock that wouldn't stop ticking. I pulled out my old briefcase, the one I hadn't opened in years. Back when I worked as a child services intern, I'd handled temporary placement files for kids caught in emergency situations. Fires, domestic abuse, accidents. But that was a decade ago, before I met my husband, before Jake was born. I dug through old folders until I found a thin, faded envelope labeled Langston, Training Year 2. Inside were photocopies of case notes. My hands shook as I flipped through them until I saw it. Case Nagsirobar 4719. Grace Cole, age 8. Temporary foster placement. No surviving parent located at time of discharge. The note was dated August 2015, the same week Ethan had been told his family was gone. I sank to the floor, my heart hammering. I'd been there, a 23-year-old intern signing off on a file that changed a man's life forever. The next line blurred my vision with tears. Child relocated to long-term care in Oak Ridge County under Witness Protection Privacy Clause. I whispered to the empty room. She was alive. And I had helped hide her. The next morning I went back to the church. Ethan was repairing a broken window frame, the morning light soft against his weathered face. When he saw me, he smiled. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I said quietly. "We need to talk." He set the hammer down. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, the words trembling. "I found her file. Grace's. She was here. She survived the fire." He froze, eyes wide, breath caught halfway between disbelief and hope. "You found her?" I hesitated. "Not exactly. She was placed into the foster system, And the person who signed her transfer papers, I swallowed hard, was me. He stared at me, not understanding. What are you saying? I worked in child services back then, I said, voice breaking. I was an intern. I didn't know your name meant anything. I just followed protocol. They said there were no living relatives. I had no idea. Ethan took a step back, his face pale. You're telling me you gave my daughter away? The words hit like stones. I didn't know. They told me the father was dead. I was just a trainee. I had no power to question it. He turned away, gripping the window ledge so tightly his knuckles went white. Do you know what it's like to spend 10 years thinking you buried your child? To believe every night that she screamed for you and you weren't there? Tears blurred my vision. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I can help fix this. We can find her. He didn't move. For a long time, the only sound was the faint crackle of the candle by the altar. Finally, he said quietly, Where do we start? We spent the rest of the afternoon in the church office, combing through every lead. Pastor Dan helped contact an old social services attorney. With each call, we uncovered small fragments, notes, hospital transfers, addresses long abandoned. Then, one name appeared again and again. Oak Ridge County Children's Home. It was 2 hours outside the city. Ethan stared at the address written on the page. That's where she was taken. I nodded. If the records are right, that's where she lived until she was adopted. He looked up sharply. Adopted? Yes, I whispered. 2 years later, no listed names. The records were sealed under the privacy clause. Ethan pressed a trembling hand to his mouth, whispering, She had a life. Someone took care of her. I reached across the table, my hand covering his. We can find her, Ethan, but we have to be prepared for whatever we find. He looked at me then. Anger gone, replaced by something deeper, heavier. Whatever happens, he said. I just want to know she was loved. That night, as I drove home, I looked in the rear-view mirror at Jake sleeping in his seat, his small hand still clutching the corner of his blanket. And for the first time, I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. Jake had been born in Oak Ridge County. The closer we got to finding Grace, the more the past began to circle back, straight to my own doorstep. Sometimes the family we think we've lost never really left. They were just waiting for the truth to find them. The drive to Oak Ridge County felt longer than miles could measure. The air outside was heavy with rain, the sky bruised gray. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, silent, his hands clasped tightly together, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but clearly lost somewhere behind it. Neither of us spoke for nearly an hour. There was too much between us now. Guilt, hope, fear. Words would have only made the silence heavier. When the old sign for Oak Ridge County Children's Home finally came into view, my stomach twisted. The building was half hidden behind overgrown trees, its paint faded, its windows fogged with time. It looked like a place where stories went to sleep and were never meant to wake again. Inside, a young woman at the reception desk greeted us with polite confusion. "We don't get many visitors here," she said softly. I showed her Grace's photograph. "We're looking for this child. She stayed here around 2015. Her eyes widened as she studied the picture. "I remember her. Grace, sweet kid. Quiet, but she drew a lot. Flowers, mostly. She left in 2017. Got adopted by a family from the city." Ethan leaned forward, his voice trembling. "Do you know who adopted her?" The woman hesitated. "I can't release names, sir. Privacy law." "Please," he said quietly, desperation breaking through. "I've been looking for her for 10 years. I thought she was dead." Something in his voice softened her resistance. She glanced around, then scribbled something on a sticky note and slid it across the counter. "I didn't tell you this," she whispered, "but her caseworker was Angela Porter. She retired last year, but she still volunteers at the public library downtown. She might remember something." We both thanked her, and as we walked back to the car, Ethan's breath came shallow, uneven. "She was alive," he murmured. "She had a home." I nodded. We'll find her, Ethan. I promise. The Oak Ridge Library smelled of dust and paper, that comforting scent of forgotten stories. It didn't take long to spot Angela Porter. Silver hair, wire-frame glasses, and the kind of kindness that seemed to come from decades of witnessing broken families trying to heal. When we approached her, I could see recognition flicker in her eyes as soon as she saw the photo. "Grace Cole," she said softly, almost reverently. "Yes, I remember her well." Ethan's voice cracked. "Please, ma'am. Do you know where she is now?" Angela studied him for a long moment. "You're her father, aren't you?" His jaw tightened as he nodded. She sighed deeply, emotion tugging at her voice. She was adopted by a couple from the city. Good people. Couldn't have children of their own. They loved her, I could tell. Ethan pressed. "Do you know their names?" She hesitated again, torn between her oath and her heart. Then, slowly, she opened an old binder from her tote bag and flipped through yellowed pages. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, "but some stories deserve an ending." She slid a page toward me. The adoption record was half faded, but the last line was clear. Adoptive parents, David and Sarah Langston. My breath vanished. The room seemed to spin around me. Angela looked up, frowning at my sudden stillness. "You're Sarah, aren't you?" I couldn't speak. Ethan turned to me, confusion flooding his face. "Sarah? What is she talking about?" Tears stung my eyes as I whispered. "Ethan, Grace isn't lost." He stepped closer. "What are you saying?" I swallowed hard. "When I married David, we adopted a baby girl. She was 6 at the time, quiet, shy. The agency said her parents had died in an accident. We named her Emma." Ethan's voice trembled. "Emma? She moved away with my ex-husband after the divorce." I continued, my throat tight. "She's 16 now. I thought she was just a foster case we'd saved. But Ethan..." My voice broke completely. "Emma is Grace." For a long time, Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. Then his knees gave way, and he sat heavily in one of the library chairs, his face buried in his hands. A sob tore from his chest, raw, trembling, full of 10 years of silence. "She's alive," he whispered through tears. "My baby's alive." I knelt beside him, gripping his hands. "Yes. And she's safe. She's happy. She grew up loved, Ethan. She's not gone." He looked up at me then, not with anger, but with something deeper, almost reverence. "You were part of her story all along," he said hoarsely. "All this time you were raising my little girl." "I didn't know," I whispered. "But I think fate did." The drive back was silent again, but this silence was different, not heavy with guilt, but trembling with possibility. Ethan stared out the window, his reflection flickering in the glass. "I don't know what to do," he said quietly. "How do I walk into her life after all this time? What if she hates me for leaving?" "She won't," I said softly. "She doesn't even know she was left. She only knows she was loved." He nodded slowly, his fingers trembling against the car door. "Can I see her?" I hesitated. "She's at boarding school now, in the city." "But yes, she deserves to know who you are." He looked at me with eyes full of both hope and fear. "Then let's tell her together." That night, I sat at my desk staring at the phone, scrolling through Emma's number. My fingers hovered over the call button. How do you tell a child that the life she's lived was built on a truth too painful to imagine? How do you tell her that the man she thought was gone is waiting for her, and that he's the reason she's even here? Finally, I pressed call. Her voice came through, bright and familiar. "Hey, Mom!" My throat tightened. "Hey, sweetheart. How's school?" "Good. We're painting an art class. I made something for you. It's a bunch of blue flowers." My breath caught. "Blue flowers?" "Yeah," she laughed softly. "I don't know why, but I always draw them. They make me feel safe." I couldn't stop the tears. "That's beautiful, honey." She paused. "Mom, are you crying?" "No," I whispered. "I'm just so proud of you." When I hung up, I turned to Ethan, who sat quietly across the table. She's coming home next week for break, I said. You'll see her then. His hands shook. I don't know what I'll say. You'll know when you see her, I said softly, because she'll know you too, even if she doesn't understand why. She was my daughter in every way that mattered, but now I had to tell her the truth about the man who gave her life. Some truths don't need words. They live in the silence between two people who already know. The week passed in slow motion. Every hour felt heavier, every minute louder. Ethan hadn't slept much. I could tell by the way he sat by the church window every morning, watching the light move across the floor like he was measuring time itself. Are you sure she's ready? He asked one morning, his voice raw from too many sleepless nights. I nodded slowly. She's 16, Ethan. She's old enough to understand what family really means. But we have to be careful. This isn't a story we can rush. He stared down at his hands. The same hands that had once built homes, carried his daughter, and then lost everything. I just want her to see me as more than what I've become, he whispered. She will, I said softly. You're the man who saved a child's life. That's who she'll see. He smiled faintly, but I saw the fear behind it. The day she came home, the air felt different, charged, almost sacred. I still remembered the first day we met her. A little girl with tangled hair and eyes that had seen too much. She had walked into our lives like a question mark, and now, 10 years later, she was coming back as the answer. When she stepped off the train, I could barely breathe. She'd grown taller, her hair longer, her smile softer but stronger. She spotted me instantly and ran straight into my arms. Mom! I held her tight, closing my eyes against the wave of emotion that hit me. Welcome home, sweetheart. She pulled back, her eyes sparkling. Who's the man in the car? I turned to where Ethan stood by the curb, his hands trembling slightly, a simple jacket draped over his shoulders. That's someone I want you to meet, I said. A friend. His name's Ethan. Ethan stepped forward, trying to steady his voice. Hi, Emma. She smiled politely, curious. Hi. He looked at her like a man seeing sunlight for the first time after years of darkness. His lips moved, but no words came out, just a soft, broken sound, halfway between a laugh and a sob. Are you okay? She asked gently. He nodded, blinking fast. You look just like someone I used to know. Emma tilted her head. Who? He hesitated, then said softly, My daughter. She smiled, unaware of the storm beneath those words. She must be lucky then. Ethan's voice cracked. I was the lucky one. That night, I made dinner for the three of us. Spaghetti, Emma's favorite. She talked about school, about her art, about how she was learning to paint landscapes. Ethan listened quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. Every word she spoke seemed to heal something in him, piece by piece. At one point she said, You know, you remind me of someone from one of my dreams. I used to dream about a man who built things with his hands, like birdhouses and fences and stuff. I'd see him smiling, but I never saw his face. Ethan's fork froze mid-air. His hand shook slightly. Dreams can be memories, he said softly. Emma smiled. Maybe. I was only little when I got adopted. Sometimes I wonder what my real parents were like. The words hung between us, fragile as glass. I reached for her hand. They loved you, I said quietly. More than you can imagine. Ethan's eyes glistened, but he said nothing. After dinner, Emma asked if she could show Ethan her drawings. She led him to her room, walls covered in sketches, flowers, sunsets, faces she'd never seen but somehow remembered. He paused in front of one, a small, delicate drawing of a little girl holding a blue flower. I drew that when I was little, she said. Mom says I used to be obsessed with blue flowers. I don't even know why. Ethan smiled weakly. Maybe because your mother loved them. She looked at him, puzzled. How do you know that? He caught himself, swallowing hard. Just a guess. Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer, then softened. You're really nice, Ethan. You remind me of home. He turned away quickly, his voice shaking. That's kind of you to say. Later that night, after she went to bed, I found him sitting alone in the backyard, staring at the stars. "She's everything I remembered," he whispered when I joined him. "The way she smiles, the way she hums when she's thinking, even the way she holds a pencil." I nodded. "She's your daughter, Ethan." He turned to me, tears glistening in his eyes. "How do I tell her that without breaking her world apart?" "You won't break it," I said softly. "You'll make it whole." He looked down at his trembling hands. "I've imagined this moment 1,000 times. In every version, I fail her again." I placed a hand over his. "You didn't fail her. Life did. And now life's giving you a second chance." He nodded slowly, then whispered, "Tomorrow. I'll tell her tomorrow." But fate had other plans. The next morning, Emma was gone. She'd left early to visit a friend, leaving only a note on the kitchen counter. "Went to the art fair downtown. Be back by dinner. Love you." Ethan's heart sank. "Downtown?" he muttered. "That's near Maple Street?" I frowned. "Why does that matter?" He hesitated. "That's where I used to sleep." Without another word, we grabbed our coats and rushed to the car. The streets buzzed with weekend crowds, laughter and music blending with the hum of city life. When we reached the art fair, my eyes darted across the stalls until I saw her, standing near a booth selling handmade crafts. She wasn't alone. A man had approached her, one of the street vendors, scruffy, aggressive, his tone sharp. She was backing away, her voice small, scared. Before I could move, Ethan was already running. "Hey!" he shouted, stepping between them. "Leave her alone!" The man sneered. "Old man, mind your business." But Ethan didn't back down. "She is my business." The man shoved him, hard. Ethan stumbled but didn't fall. "You touch her again," he said quietly, "and I swear you'll regret it." The vendor cursed under his breath and stalked off. Emma stared at Ethan, her eyes wide. You came out of nowhere." Ethan smiled faintly, catching his breath. "I told you, I build things. Sometimes that means fences. Sometimes it means safety." She blinked, realization flickering across her face. "That's what you said about your daughter. How you'd protect her no matter what." He nodded. For a moment, the world around them blurred, noise fading, lights dimming, as she looked at him and whispered, "Ethan, who are you?" He didn't answer right away, because sometimes the truth deserves a moment of silence before it's spoken. Some memories don't die. They wait for the right heartbeat to wake them. The fair buzzed with music and chatter. But for Emma and Ethan, the world had gone completely still. She stared at him, the man who had just defended her, the man whose voice carried both comfort and ache. "Who are you?" she repeated, softer this time. Ethan swallowed hard, his breath shaky. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I should have told you the moment we met." I reached them just then, weaving through the crowd. I could see his hands trembling, his eyes fixed on hers. I knew this was it, the moment everything would change. He took a step closer. "Emma," he began, his voice breaking. "The truth is, you're not a stranger to me. You never were." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "You had another name once," he whispered. "Grace." Her eyes widened. "Grace?" He nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Grace Cole. You were 8 years old. We lived on Riverstone Lane. There was a fire, and I thought you didn't make it." Emma blinked rapidly, confusion flashing across her face. "That can't be. My parents told me." "They told you your family died in an accident," I said gently, stepping beside them. "Because that's what everyone believed, including me." Emma's breathing quickened. "You knew?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Not until recently. I swear, sweetheart, I didn't know when we adopted you. But I know now." Ethan reached into his worn jacket pocket and pulled out a small, charred locket, the same one he'd kept through every sleepless night. Inside was a photo. A little girl with messy pigtails and a blue ribbon. Emma gasped. "That's me." He smiled through tears. "I've kept it every day since that night. It was all I had left, until I met you again." Her hands shook as she touched the locket. "You're saying, you're my dad?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, Grace. I'm your father." The air between them seemed to crack. For a moment she just stared, as if trying to see through years of lost time. "I remember the blue flowers," she whispered suddenly. "I used to dream about picking them from a garden while someone called my name. I thought it was a dream, but it was you." Ethan let out a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. "You always said blue was your lucky color. You said it reminded you of the sky on the day you were born." She took a trembling step forward. "I don't remember your face, but I remember the feeling." He opened his arms, afraid she'd pull away. But she didn't. She ran straight into them. When their arms closed around each other, years of grief collapsed into a single heartbeat. They stood like that for a long time. A father and daughter, strangers to the world, but finally home to each other. People walked past them, unaware that a miracle was unfolding in the middle of the street. When they finally pulled apart, Emma wiped her tears, smiling through them. "I always wondered why I loved flowers so much," she said. "Now I know. They were ours." Ethan laughed softly. "You used to say flowers were just pieces of hope waiting to bloom." She grinned. Still true. Later that evening, back at the house, the three of us sat together on the porch. The sunset painted the sky in colors even Emma couldn't have imagined in her sketches. "I'm sorry for what you both went through," I said quietly. "But maybe everything led here for a reason." Ethan nodded. "Maybe some miracles take the long way home." Emma looked between us. "You know what's crazy? I don't feel confused. It's like I've always known you were out there." Ethan smiled, his voice soft. "And I never stopped looking." Soft piano music plays while Emma shows Ethan her childhood drawings. He repairs an old birdhouse for her school project. She places the silver pendant he gave her years ago beside the locket. Two lives joined. That night, before she went to bed, Emma turned to him. "Dad?" The word made him freeze. "Yes?" "I don't blame you for anything," she said. "You didn't lose me. We just had to find each other again." He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "I don't deserve you." She smiled. "Maybe not. But you're mine anyway. Their story should have ended with loss. But love doesn't know how to stop once it's found its way home. After the truth broke us open, silence became sacred, because sometimes love speaks loudest in the quiet that follows forgiveness." The night after their reunion, the world felt lighter, as if the sky itself had unclenched. The rain that had hung above the city for days finally broke into a gentle drizzle, washing the streets clean. Inside our small house, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock felt louder than usual. But in that quiet, peace was beginning to take root. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Emma sat across from him, her head resting on her folded arms, drawing lazy circles on the wooden surface with her finger. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of everything words could never fit. I watched them from the doorway. A man and his daughter, strangers a week ago, now bound by blood, pain, and grace. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "When I lost you, Grace," he said quietly, "I promised myself that if I ever found you again, I'd never let a single day go by without telling you how proud I am of you." She looked up, her eyes glistening in the soft light. "Then say it," she whispered. He smiled, a trembling, tearful smile. "I'm proud of you, Emma, of everything you are." She blinked back tears. "You can still call me Grace sometimes, you know. I don't mind." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You'll always be both. Emma, the girl who grew strong, and Grace, the little one who taught me what love really means." Later that night, I found Emma sitting by the window, sketchbook open on her lap. She was drawing, not flowers this time, but two hands reaching for each other, connected by a single blue ribbon. Can I see? I asked. She turned the book toward me. It's us, she said. Me and him. I want to paint it for the shop wall. I smiled. He'll love that. She nodded slowly, her gaze drifting outside. Mom, do you think people can come back to us even after we think they're gone? I took a deep breath. Sometimes they never really leave, sweetheart. They just wait for us to be ready to see them again. The next morning, Ethan stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his old jacket. I'd never seen him look so alive. His eyes still carried pain, yes. But it was a different kind of pain now. Not the kind that crushed, but the kind that reminded you'd survived. I need to work again, he said suddenly. Not because I have to, but because I want her to see that her father can build something again. I smiled. You already have. He chuckled, shaking his head. No, I mean really work. I used to build homes, remember? Maybe it's time I start doing that again. I nodded, understanding. You're not just rebuilding houses anymore, Ethan. You're rebuilding yourself. He looked at me then, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. You saved me twice. Once when you gave me food, and once when you brought me back to her. I didn't save you, I said softly. You just needed someone to remind you that you were still worth saving. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of life began to find its melody again. Ethan found work with a local construction company. The first day he came home with dust on his hands again, he smiled like a man rediscovering his heartbeat. Emma spent her afternoons helping me in the shop, arranging flowers with a care that now carried deeper meaning. One evening, she said, "You know what's funny? I used to draw flowers because I thought they were pretty, but now I draw them because they mean something. Every petal has a story." I nodded. That's what makes them alive. She smiled. Just like us. Ethan hammering nails into a new wooden frame at work. Emma painting the mural of two hands connected by a blue ribbon on the flower shop wall. The three of us laughing as we closed the shop at sunset. The pendant and the locket hanging side by side above the cash register. The day Emma finished the mural, Ethan stood staring at it for a long time. The late sunlight hit the blue ribbon in the painting, making it shimmer. She tied us together, he murmured, even before we knew. Emma turned to him and said softly, "That's why I used blue. It's the color of the sky, remember? The one you said was lucky." He laughed quietly. "I guess it was." As weeks turned into months, something beautiful happened. People started noticing Ethan for who he was, not who he'd been. A local newspaper picked up his story. Homeless man reunites with daughter after 10 years, now rebuilding lives one home at a time. The article went viral. Customers poured into the shop, some just to meet him, others to tell their own stories of loss and faith. One woman came in holding back tears. "Your story gave me the courage to call my son again," she said. "Thank you." Ethan smiled gently, placing a small flower in her hand. "Then that's all the thanks I'll ever need." That night, as we closed up the shop, Ethan looked around and said, "Do you ever wonder why life took us through all that pain before giving us peace?" I thought for a moment. Maybe so we'd know how to recognize peace when it finally came. He nodded. "Then I'll never take another sunrise for granted." Emma looked at both of us and smiled. "Can we make a promise?" "Anything," Ethan said. "No matter what happens, no matter how hard life gets again, we promise to always find each other, even if the world tries to pull us apart again." Ethan placed his hand over hers. "I promise." I placed mine on top. "Me too." And for the first time in a long, long while, I believed that was a promise life would actually let us keep. Peace had finally found us, but life, as always, had one more twist waiting in the wings. Sometimes love doesn't stay to be seen. It stays to be felt. In every life it quietly changes. It had been almost a year since that day, the day Emma called him Dad for the first time. Since then, our days had found rhythm. The hum of the flower shop in the morning, the sound of Ethan's laughter at dinner, the comforting silence of evenings shared in peace. The past had finally stopped chasing us, But peace has a way of whispering its own warnings. Soft, almost invisible, until it's gone. Ethan had started coughing again. It began as a rough sound in the mornings, the kind that made you think it was just the weather or the dust from work. But soon it grew deeper, sharper, a sound that came from somewhere too far inside to be harmless. I noticed first. "You need to see a doctor," I said one evening, watching him wipe his mouth with a tissue he thought I hadn't seen. The red stain on it burned into my mind. He waved it off with his usual half-smile. "I'm fine, Sarah. Just tired." But he wasn't. Within weeks, the cough turned into fever, and the fever into fatigue that kept him in bed most days. He still tried to work, still tried to smile for Emma, but I could see the weight in his eyes, the same look he'd carried all those years ago when he'd lost everything. This time, I refused to let him face it alone. The hospital smelled like cold metal and antiseptic. We sat side by side as the doctor explained the diagnosis, a severe respiratory condition, worsened by years of exposure to the streets and untreated illness. "It's not impossible to manage," the doctor said gently. "But it's late. The damage is extensive." Ethan only nodded. "How long?" The doctor hesitated. "Months, maybe less if the condition worsens." Emma sat frozen, her eyes wide and glistening. "No," she whispered. "There has to be something. He was fine last week. He was laughing." Ethan reached over, taking her trembling hands in his. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly. "Don't cry. I've had more good days this past year than in the 10 before it. That's enough for me." But it wasn't enough for her. At home she tried to hide her tears, but they came anyway, in the quiet moments, while arranging flowers or sketching by the window. I'd find her sitting near his bed, reading out loud just so he wouldn't drift off alone. He'd listen with a faint smile, his hand resting gently over hers. "You know," he said one night, "when I was younger, I used to think love was about holding on. But now I know it's also about letting go. When it's time." She shook her head fiercely. "Don't say that." He chuckled softly. "Then I won't. I'll just say this. When I'm gone, don't stop building beautiful things. Flowers, art, homes, people. Whatever you touch, make it better." She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Instrumental, slow piano with cello Emma sitting by his bedside sketching blue flowers. Ethan whispering stories from her childhood as she listens, smiling through tears. Sarah watching them, hands clasped, a prayer unspoken. The locket and pendant resting side by side on the nightstand. One morning, I woke to sunlight spilling across the floor. For a moment, everything was too still. I went to check on him. He was sitting by the window, eyes closed, the morning light painting his face in gold. He looked peaceful, like a man who had finally forgiven the world and himself. But when I called his name, he didn't answer. The coffee cup beside him was still warm. His hand still held Emma's last drawing, the one of the two hands bound by the blue ribbon. He was gone. The days that followed blurred together, soft voices, trembling hands, people from the town stopping by with flowers and tears. The entire community that once looked past him now came to honor him. Emma didn't speak much. She spent hours sitting in the shop, staring at the mural she'd painted. Sometimes she'd whisper, "He's still here," as though reminding herself it was true. And maybe it was. Because a week later, while going through his things, we found a sealed envelope tucked inside the drawer beside his bed. On it, in his rough, familiar handwriting, were 3 words. "For my girls." Inside was a letter. "My dearest Sarah and Grace, if you're reading this, it means I finally ran out of time. But don't let that make you sad. I've lived a full life because of you. Sarah, you gave me back my faith in people. You taught me that kindness doesn't need an audience. It just needs courage. Grace, my little one, I missed your first steps, your first day of school, your birthdays. But I got to see something even better. I saw the woman you've become. I saw the artist, the dreamer, the light you carry. Don't ever let life make you small again. And when you doubt yourself, remember this. Flowers don't bloom because the world is kind to them. They bloom because they refuse to give up on the sun. Build something in my name if you want. Not for me, but for the people who still believe they're too broken to begin again. With all my love, Dad. The letter ended there, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. Emma framed it and hung it in the shop, just below the mural of the two hands and the blue ribbon. Underneath, she placed a small brass plaque that read, "In memory of Ethan Cole, the man who rebuilt more than homes." And right beside it, a vase of blue flowers, always fresh, always bright. Months later, the shop hosted an event, the Ethan Cole Foundation, dedicated to helping homeless families rebuild their lives through art and craft. Emma stood on stage, holding a single flower, her voice steady and clear. "My father taught me that broken doesn't mean finished," she said. "It means you've been tested, and you survived." The crowd rose in quiet applause. Somewhere I like to think he heard it. The man who once had nothing left to give had left us everything. Purpose, love, and a promise that still blooms in every heart he touched. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the places we thought would never heal. It's been 3 years since Ethan's passing. 3 years since the day we found his letter, and 3 years since the shop that started as a way to survive became something far greater. The sign above the window now reads, "Grace and Bloom, flowers that tell a story." Below it, in smaller letters, it says, "In loving memory of Ethan Cole." Every morning, I unlock the door and take a deep breath of the scent that fills the air, fresh lilies, wild roses, and bluebells. The same blue flowers that meant everything to him. Emma designed the logo herself, a single blue ribbon woven into a blooming flower. A reminder that beauty and pain often share the same roots. People come from all over the city now. Some to buy flowers, some just to talk, some to remember. Every person who walks through the door leaves with more than a bouquet. They leave with a story, and a spark of faith that maybe, just maybe, kindness still matters. Emma grew into the woman her father always hoped she'd be. She finished art school and now teaches free painting classes for children who live in shelters, the ones who think the world has forgotten them. I often watch her from across the shop, standing in front of a group of small kids with paint-streaked fingers and wide, hopeful eyes. Her voice always carries warmth. "It doesn't matter how messy it looks," she tells them. "Every color has a place in the picture, just like you." The way they look at her, that quiet awe, reminds me of how she once looked at Ethan. It's like his spirit never left. It just changed form. One afternoon, while cleaning the back room, I found an old wooden box, the one Ethan used to keep under his bed. Inside were his tools, a hammer, a measuring tape, and a small carving knife. Tucked beneath them was a folded note in his handwriting. "If you ever build something new, make sure it has room for someone who needs a place to start again." I smiled through tears, knowing exactly what he meant. That night, Emma and I sat down together, the letter between us, and we made a decision. We would open a second shop, not just to sell flowers, but to train women and men who had once been homeless, lost, or forgotten. To teach them how to create beauty with their own hands, bouquets, wreaths, art, anything that reminded them of their worth. We called it the Second Bloom Project. And just like that, his promise became purpose. Montage for the closing visual sequence, 70-minute cinematic finish. Emotional orchestral build, piano and soft strings, Emma showing an older woman how to tie a bouquet ribbon. A young man signing his first paycheck at the new shop, smiling through tears. Children painting a mural on the wall, a garden of blue flowers with a quote, "Hope grows here." Sarah lighting a candle beside Ethan's photo each morning before opening the doors. One evening, after closing time, I found Emma standing outside, looking up at the mural. The sky behind her burned with shades of violet and gold. She turned to me and smiled softly. "You know, Mom," she said, "I used to think we were cursed, that losing everything meant we'd never have peace again." "And now?" I asked. She looked at the mural, at the hands, the flowers, the blue ribbon winding through them all. "Now I think we were chosen, not to suffer, but to understand what healing really means." I nodded, my chest tightening with quiet pride. "He'd be proud of you." She smiled. "He already knows." As night settled over the city, we locked up the shop and started walking home. The streetlights flickered to life one by one, and the air smelled faintly of rain, the same kind that had once carried us through our darkest nights. Emma stopped suddenly and looked up. "Do you hear that?" I listened. The wind was soft, carrying the distant sound of laughter, a child's laughter. For a moment we both smiled, neither of us saying what we both felt. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was something else. But deep down, we knew. Epilogue. 1 year late. A local TV network aired a feature story on Grayson Bloom and the Second Bloom Project. The headline read, "From the Streets to Second Chances, The Legacy of Ethan Cole." The camera panned over the shop, over the mural, over the rows of blue flowers glowing under the soft light. Emma stood in front of the camera, composed but radiant. "This isn't just my father's story," she said. "It's for every person who's ever been told their life is over. It's not over. It's just waiting to begin again." The segment ended with a close-up of Ethan's plaque. He rebuilt more than homes. The screen faded to black. Ethan taught us that brokenness isn't the end. It's the soil where new life begins. He left us flowers, yes, but more than that, he left us faith. Faith that kindness can survive anything. Faith that love can bloom even after loss. And faith that every act of compassion plants a seed that outlives us all. Because sometimes, all it takes to change the world is to stop the car and buy a single flower. One act of kindness can bloom into a lifetime of Chang. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Someone out there might need this reminder of hope today. Tell me in the comments what part moved you the most, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that prove kindness still exists in this world.